name of gain and profit for one's nation and village, shinobi have hated and hurt each other for many years, from the first to the third-rate ninja wars and the conflicts in between. All of that hatred cried out for power, thus I was born. In the past, I was hatred, and power, and a Jinchuriki. I hated this world and all its people, and thought about destroying both. But then, a single shinobi from the Hidden Leaf Village stopped me. I was his enemy, yet still he cried for me. And he called me his friend, even though we had battled. He saved me. Between those who have experienced the same pain, there can be no hate. There are no enemies here now. The friend I spoke of who saved me is the target of our enemy. If he falls into their hands, our world's finished. I want to protect my friend. And I want to protect this entire world.
Fight and you may die. Run. You'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now. Would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Satan's Little Season. This is a part of eschatology or apocalyptic literature from the Bible that many people are not aware of. Many Christians are not aware of. Now, we're going to be discussing this theology. Are we currently in the West, and really that would mean the globe as an entirety, but especially feeling the implications of this particular theology, are we in Satan's little season here in the West, here in the world as an entirety right now? This is where you get this doctrine fleshed out in Scripture. It's not all over, from Genesis to Revelation, all the contents of the Bible, but there is one particular chapter. This is Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, and then also looking at verses 7 through 11. Okay, so I'm going to read right here, Revelation chapter 20, starting verse 1. The Bible says, "And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time." So Satan locked in the abyss and then set free for a short time. Satan's little season. Picking up now with verse 7 of Revelation chapter 20, says this, "When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city that he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever." This again is Revelation chapter 20. primarily looking at verses 1 through 3 and also 7 through 10. What we're going to be talking about today is eschatology, which means study of the end times. What does the Bible actually teach about that? This one particular eschatological doctrine, Satan's little season, is something that a few people have talked about, but not many. It's not really... doesn't merit for itself the lion's share of church history when it comes to eschatological views. But we're going to be fleshing it out today in our episode. And we're also going to be referencing a book that has not been, there was moments where it was circulating, but for the most part has been heavily suppressed, and even portions of history where it was not even able to be printed. I believe it was the 1970s. So this isn't a book that's, centuries, years old, but rather something rather recent, about 50 years old, give or take, that was written called Camp of the Saints. And think of... if you think of A Brave New World, or you think of 1984, think of a dystopian fictional novel, right? So it's fiction, but it's painting a picture of our future and a dystopian outcome of the future where all of Western civilization collapses. And when you think of, George Orwell or different authors, the way that they would paint dystopian, futuristic, apocalyptic, fictional descriptions is usually through technology. Technology comes and ruins the world, or simply just progressivism, liberalism gone amok, communism, communism destroying the world where 2 + 2 = 5 now. You're not allowed to think logically or any of these things. Well, Camp of the Saints is similar to that, except I think a lot more likely, a lot more realistic, because what Camp of the Saints depicts is a dystopian, futuristic reality where it's not just AI taking over the world or communism taking over the world. It is the third world taking over the civilized world. It is limitless infinity immigration, and the West losing its resolve to live. The West saying, well, we don't want to be mean, we've got to be nice, and we're going to be empathetic, embracing, toxic empathy, and the West basically just rolling over on its sword. The West committing social suicide as its shores are flooded with wave after wave after wave of millions and millions of third world immigrants who come into the West with zero appreciation. And we're going to read some of the quotes from Camp of the Saints. Again, this is for the most part, a banned book, and primarily banned for, I'm sure you can guess the reasons. Because it's racist, because it's a bunch of Western, predominantly white people who are ultimately destroyed, and civilization, the world is destroyed by third world countries, which are mostly predominantly brown people. And so it's taken sharp criticism for the last 50 years, but there have been moments where this book got a little bit of motion, as the kids say, and circulated and was read. And for those who are willing to give it a fair shake, and not just, give some kind of review in order to adhere to political correctness, but actually read the book on its own merits. It has been widely appreciated and spoken of very highly. It's a book that I personally read about a year ago, and many other individuals in the right-wing space within Christian nationalism have read this book as well. Again, it's not well known. But I would encourage you to check out Camp of the Saints if you have the opportunity to do so. We're actually working on a publication of Camp of the Saints, revised and in English, because I believe the author was actually French. And so the book has to be translated, but you can find certain copies in certain places. And again, it's incredibly insightful. Think George Orwell, but more accurate, more likely, not just, it's AI, it's the communists, the Bolsheviks. You always see the MAGA guys, the Bolsheviks. Well, this actually kind of names who the Bolsheviks are and the pawns that they use, which is infinity immigration from the third world and the Western world losing its resolve to fight back because they want to be viewed as nice. So Camp of the Saints gives a picture of the biblical picture, right? Camp of the Saints is fiction. It's not infallible, but the biblical picture that we find in Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, as well as verses 7 through 10, that all the world, the armies of Satan surround God's people, the camp of the saints, right? That Satan was locked away in the abyss, no longer able to deceive the nations. The Christian gospel spreads out and goes forth and Christianizes the known world at the time. Every nation becoming Christian, not just private, personal faith, individual people being converted religiously, but whole societies, civilizations being Christianized, their law, their customs, art, philosophy, everything. The known world being Christianized for this metaphorical 1,000 years of Christendom, where the gospel goes forth, the nations are discipled, and then there's this short season, it's short, where the abyss is unlocked, Satan resurfaces, and he's able to deceive nations again. He's not able to deceive the people of God. So there's this metaphorical city, this place. And some would say, it's the Antichrist and it's Jerusalem. They're surrounding Israel. No, it's God's people. It doesn't say Satan's people, the devil's people, sons of the devil. That's what Jesus says in John chapter 8, sons of the devil. No, they're surrounding God's people, God's sons. So Christians, not people who hate Christ, right? Not Israel, but actual Christians surrounded by the rest of the world that now has reverted back into deception, being deceived by Satan, has turned against the Christian world, whatever that is, wherever that is, viewed by God as a city that he loves, and they're surrounded on all sides. But like a remnant, they persevere during this short season of intense fury from Satan, and then God comes and rescues them. That's Revelation chapter 20, and that's the same kind of fictional picture that's played out in the novel Camp of the Saints. That's what we're going to be breaking down, bringing quotes, bringing certain doctrine and theology. Is Satan's little season, is that a biblical way to interpret Revelation chapter 20? Is that faithful? That's our episode for today, so go ahead and tune in now.
Radical Christian nationalist pastor, Joel Webbon.
Joel Webbon? I want to talk about Joel Webbon today.
Joel Webbon has been excellent.
Well, something profound that the author Jean Raspail does in his 1973 novel, The Camp of the Saints, is he directly views the mass immigration coming in from the Third World as an attack on Christianity. I'm going to read a couple quotes here from the book. He says this: "Day by day, month by month, doubt by doubt, law and order became fascism, education became constraint, work, alienation, revolution, mere sport, leisure, a privilege of class, marijuana, a harmless weed, family, a stifling hothouse, affluence, oppression, success, a social disease, sex, an innocent pastime, youth, a permanent tribunal, maturity, the new senility, discipline, an attack on personality." He's describing the decay of the West, and he says Christianity and the West. He continues, "On this Easter Sunday evening, 800,000 living beings," describing this mass flotilla that departs from India, very prescient. 800,000 living beings and thousands of dead ones were making their peaceful assault on the Western world. Tomorrow it would all be over, and now, rising up from the coast to the hills, to the villages, to the house and its terrace, a gentle chanting, yet so very strong for all its gentleness, like a kind of sing-song, droned by a chorus of 800,000 voices. Long, long ago, the Crusaders had sung as they circled Jerusalem on the eve of their last attack. And finally, this quote is not directly related to Christianity, but it's so good, and we see examples of this happening even now. There was a video that circulated last week in Britain of a migrant, a Muslim-looking Middle Eastern man. He was taking down a wall because he didn't want to go through the work of going around it. And so there's this beautiful stone wall that had likely stood for over 1,000 years. But to him, it was nothing more than just in the way. And so he took to taking the stones off of them so that he could ascend without having to be inconvenienced to go around. And this quote circulated, and it's so prescient. Your universe has no meaning to them. The Western world, no meaning to them, the third world. They will not try to understand. They will be tired. They will be cold. They will make a fire with your beautiful oak door. And again, we're using this book, this fictional book, as an example to point to the larger image, the larger idea, which is an idea that none of us are necessarily signing on right now and saying, we think this is absolutely how it is. We've got the interpretation for the end times. We know how it ends, and this is it. But what we are saying is it's worth considering. It's worth considering the exegesis. It's worth framing and saying, this is possible. And so all the way back to the book, it's an attack on the West. It's an attack on Christendom, and specifically, it's the apathy of the state, it's the apathy of government, and it's also apathy of the church. The church in the book is the tool, are the individuals that are advocating for welcoming these groups in, that are saying, lay down your arms, be welcoming, don't put up resistance. We have humanitarian concerns. Instead of the church and the state saying, no, you have a duty to protect the people of France. We have a duty to protect our culture. We have a duty to keep others safe. It's the church and state together that both lay back and say, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to put up a fight.
Yep, well said. I'm seeing in the chat right now, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think there's some good, insightful comments in the chat. Numa is saying Satan's little season happened already in the first century during the Great Tribulation before his Christ's second coming. So if you're not familiar with that theology, I'll break it down briefly. The idea is that Christ in his second coming has already occurred. So this is a preterist view of the Scripture, and particularly the New Testament. The technical label would be partial preterist. So it's this position doesn't say that every single jot and tittle, every verse of the New Testament has already been fulfilled. Preterist is just from the Latin; it means past or fulfilled. But the partial preterist view is that there are many New Testament texts that traditionally evangelicals and Protestants and Catholics, for that matter, think are still in our future. And yet these New Testament texts, inspired by the Holy Spirit, the apostles, when they wrote them, it was in their future, but long in our past. So this view would insist that Jesus' second coming, his parousia, his second coming, has already taken place. It happened in AD 70, and it was not a final physical return of Christ for which we are still waiting. That's the final physical return of Christ, but that there was a second coming of Christ that was spiritual, that Christ in his glorified body, after his resurrection and ascension to the right hand of God the Father, he is seated in his glorified physical body at the right hand of God the Father, but spiritually, the Spirit of the risen Christ did return to Israel, Jerusalem, and through providence, through his sovereignty, used Titus to sack the temple, to sack Jerusalem, and to bring judgment on the very people who 40 years, give or take, before crucified the Lord of glory. The Jewish people at that time who yelled, crucify him, crucify him. This is now 40 years later in AD 70. Jesus says this in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. He says, this generation will not pass away. And people try to make that a metaphor or something symbolic. But what if Jesus was being literal? What if he actually meant there are people in the crowd as I'm preaching in Matthew chapter 24 next to the Temple Mount? He says, I tell you the truth, this temple, not one stone will be left on top of another. This is actually one of the most profound and precise, specific prophecies that Jesus ever gives. And he says, this generation will not pass away until these things come to pass. And then 40 years later, when many of those individuals still would have been alive, that generation had not yet passed away, they actually saw the fulfillment to the very words of Christ that he made 40 years prior, before his crucifixion, in Matthew chapter 24. The temple was sacked. Titus and the Romans, they sacked the temple, and it was inladen with gold. And so they actually took every single stone that was on top of another and removed them and scraped off the gold, and so that they could collect it and bring it into their treasuries. And so this perfect fulfillment to the words of Christ and this great calamity, this great tribulation. Many people who stayed in Jerusalem, the Jewish people who stayed there, that did not heed the words of Christ and flee to the hillsides and run, those who tried to stay, saying, well, he's our protector. God will save us. God will protect us. No, the God that they were claiming would protect them is God the Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, and is providentially actually the one who is causing the Romans to come and sack the city as a direct judgment because they rejected Christ and crucified the Lord of glory. And so some would say that Satan's little season was those few months or a year or so of that tribulation, that great tribulation where Jerusalem, the city, literally fell into the hands of the Romans and was decimated, that was the time of Satan's release. And I understand that position, and I'm inclined towards it. So for me, in terms of my eschatology, I am postmillennial. In other words, I believe that Christ will return after, not before. And I don't think rapture, it's not biblical. That's a dispensational Zionist theology. And so I don't believe in a literal rapture, and I don't believe that Christ is going to return before he sets up his millennial kingdom, right? That 1,000 years, whether it's exact, literal, or metaphorical, this season of Christ ruling and reigning tangibly on earth, the millennial kingdom. Premillennialism is the idea that Christ is going to return before the millennial kingdom, before he sets up his earthly, tangible reign for 1,000 years, whether that 1,000 years be literal or metaphorical. He's going to return before that, premillennial. I am postmillennial. I believe that the final physical return of Christ will come after his millennial kingdom, his rule here on earth. And I believe that we are in that millennial kingdom, that we have seen throughout 1,500 years of Christendom, tracking all the way back. You could go back to, 1,000 years ago, King Alfred, but you could go 1,500 years, give or take, all the way to Constantine. That the known world, and particularly the Western world, has been thoroughly Christianized by the gospel, by the writing of the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Christian faith. You have biblical case law. In every Western country. You have elongated lifespans. You have diseases eradicated. You have Christianized arts and philosophy and mass conversions. And so the Christian church, which is Christ's body. So Christ, in his glorified body, seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, but Christ is the head of the church, so his body is his hands and feet. The church is the body of Christ, his hands and feet on earth. So Christ has been reigning on earth in a tangible way through the church, not aside from the church, separate from the church or despite the church, but through the church for these last 1,500 years, and this has been his millennial kingdom. Now the question is, before his return, final physical return, is the millennial kingdom going to strengthen, or was that it? Did we experience Christendom, and now it's simply going to wane until the end? This little season, did this Satan's little season occur in AD 70, and then we've been in this millennial kingdom afterwards? Or could you make an argument that Satan's little kingdom comes after, or Satan's little season comes after the millennial kingdom, that we experience Christendom, and now Satan has been released from the abyss and permitted to deceive the nations once more. And that's why all these Christian nations have become liberal and progressive and abandoned, apostatized from the Christian faith. And we have all these third world countries that are not Christian, that are invading and overwhelming these Western countries. There is an argument to be made, and some guys have made that argument, and it is compelling.
Every generation, for a while at least, has thought that they're in the end times. Martin Luther, he thought for sure this was the final season, that the Pope was the Antichrist. It's pretty common to think this is the end. Nuclear war, nuclear weapons, we can't be anything more than days away from the end. But what's compelling about this is if you read the passage, Satan goes out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth. Nations is the idea of birth, of lineage, of races. So he goes out to deceive the races of the earth and to gather them for battle, and a number they are like the sand on the seashore. That actually wouldn't be descriptive of Luther's time. That wouldn't be descriptive of the 30 Years' War that happened in Europe. That wouldn't be descriptive even of necessarily the Cold War. But if you think of the camp of the saints as the third world, and you think of Christendom primarily as centered in Europe, then all of a sudden you're numerous as the sands of the seashore. That actually kind of begins to make sense, surrounding God's people banding together, saying, no, we are, we're not the same racially, but we're also Christian. And that's what sets us apart. And so we're not going to lay down and take this banding together, gathered up into the city of God's people, and surrounded, in this case, literally, not just figuratively, but literally by the nations of the earth, marshaled against them, hating them, and seeking to destroy them.
Yeah, that's well said. I think that's exactly why I think this is so interesting. Like, if I read verse 7, I think the plain reading of the text, and when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations. To your point, Wes, I would say it strikes me, plain reading strikes me as temporally we see Christ's reign, and then we see Satan's little season and the mass deception. And I think it comports. I mean, there's certainly analogs. Now, I'm not going to say this is the only time that there have been analogs to passages like this. Obviously, you can look back in history, and you could have pointed to the French Revolution and secularization of Europe in the 18th century and said, "Oh man, this is the decline of Christendom." And you would,
and that's the thing,
have
is you can
perfect
go a little
utility.
bit later with the start time and a little bit earlier with the decline. You can do 1,500 years for sure from King Alfred. You can also kind of fit 1,000 in there. And so this does have the advantage. One of the ways, if you don't read it as this, is you're going to have to say, well, the 1,000 years is speaking typologically, right? God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, not a literal 1,000 hills that could be counted one by one, but the idea, he owns it all. You'd have to do the same thing with this passage. Christ's rule and reign, if it is 50,000 years, then you would say this is symbolic. It's 1,000 years. The fullness of time is how long he reigns. One of the advantages of this, not the only advantage, and there are disadvantages, but one of the advantages of this is to say he had 1,000 years. It did happen. He promised that Christ would rule and reign and subdue the world, and he did. He subdued the known world, as you were saying, elevated everything from art and music and theology and philosophy and medicine. He elevated all of them, and then let Satan out one final time to surround the saints, and there God will display his salvation, raining down fire on the wicked and bringing about the final judgment.
Yeah, and globalization is, I think, the interesting element here. When you hear like language that alludes to the four corners of the earth, I think it works in both ways. So we think of Christendom predominantly in Europe, but there were colonies literally in all four corners of the earth. I mean, there was expeditions to Antarctica, for goodness sake, and under the British Empire. And so you actually do see Christendom spread to places like India and colonization and Southwest Asia, or Southeast Asia, I should say. And so you do see Christendom spread. And then likewise, in this globalized world, we also see this massive connectivity in a way of nations engaging with other nations, hundreds of nations now having relations with one another and fighting and proxy battles and all of these things. And so it really does the language itself, it becomes more relevant, I suppose, as time goes on, technological advancement.
And why did colonization in Christendom fail in places like India and Africa? Because they came weak and they didn't want to preserve it.
Right.
Satan goes out to deceive the nations. So Christianity spreads across the earth. They have a foothold. They're Christianizing. They're teaching. They didn't just go to say, we're going to take all the lumber and the resources from India. They taught them Christianity. They taught them the scriptures. They educated them in reading. But then there came a point, and it was after World War II, where he said, we don't have the energy to maintain colonies here in Rhodesia and India. We're going to give it all up. And as they give it all up, they revert back to their paganism. They revert back to their false worship. And then they become the breeding ground, the armies, the marshaling, that eventually migrate in mass.
Right, and the marshaling is important too, because a lot of these colonies, they're now defined in their anti-colonialism against Christendom. So it's not like, it's not necessarily like, oh, Christians have left and like we were left to our own devices and we just like regressed, right? It's actually, no, we reject everything that was imported. It was colonial, it wasn't us, and we hate it. And now we'll go to the most extreme lengths to reject it and to attack it and to not only in our own country, which would be bad enough, but we're actually going to export anti-colonialism to other countries, predominantly in the West. And this has been facilitated by immigration. So as you brought people from these nations, they brought also their antipathy toward the West. I mean, we bring these Muslims, we bring these Pakistani immigrants, so on and so forth. They come here and they hate what the West has done. It's not like they're like, we're on board. It's not the immigrants of the 1970s who are like, we're on board, we love America. We're literally importing antipathy on this colonial power dynamic. And so, and in that way, we're being surrounded not only geographically, which is certainly true, but we're also being surrounded in our own nation. Our churches are being surrounded, bought out by mosques, bought out by Hindu temples, etc. And so all this to say, like, it's all a framing and perspective. Like, no one's going to pretend like they can make perfect sense of Revelation 20. But the reality is, as all people have done, is we're trying to read the text and apply the text to our time, trying to make sense of things. And the way that, the most obvious way you can make sense of Christendom is, to your point, Joel, 1,500 years, perhaps 1,000, depending on when you start. But we are certainly, without even an argument, really, a good argument, we are certainly in a period of decline in terms of Christianity and its influence, both without, but also within, and talking about a weakened church and an apathetic church. And so whatever you make of it, the situation is dire. And we're looking at Scripture and saying, okay, perhaps there are...
This dire?
Right. Perhaps it's this dire, and perhaps it could get worse. Who knows? We're always men of our times, and things certainly could get worse. It certainly could become more violent, less affluent in America. I think all metrics and indications point to that actually happening, bar a revival, I would say, in the church. But yeah, that's where basically I think we stand in terms of trying to make sense of this. It's interesting, it's worth considering. We're trying to make sense of the day of our age and the decline of Christendom, and this provides some pretty interesting conclusions, I think.
Yep. All right, let's take a quick break. We're going to go and hear a message from two of our sponsors, and we'll be right back. If you've been following our channel, then you know that we've been tracking SAGA Metals. It's trading as SAGMF in the US and SAGA, SAGA, in Canada. Back in January, we covered their massive drill program in Labrador. But there's even bigger news now. SAGA just acquired another titanium asset in the same district as the largest titanium mine in the world. And we have to look at this for what it really is, a U.S. national security imperative. Titanium is now a designated defense metal because you simply cannot build F-35 fighter jets, advanced radar, or next-gen naval platforms without it. This is more than just a resource investment narrative. It's geopolitics. And SAGA isn't sitting still. They now have the potential to make one of the largest titanium discoveries North America has ever seen. SAGA Metals is a company that I'm still watching very closely. If you want to learn more about this critical mineral story, then check out the link in the description below. A special thanks to SAGA Metals for making today's video possible. Warning. This product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. All right, I'm going to keep this simple. Look, I know that you know that I know that you know you're using nicotine. Half of the people listening to this show, you're using some kind of nicotine product. I know this. I'm in group chats with you. You have told me to my face. I know you're using it. So I'm not asking you to start a new habit. I'm not asking you to add something to your budget. I'm not asking you to spend money that you're not already spending. I'm simply asking for you to transition to a based Christian America First company. Right there on the cover, you have a foot crushing the head of the serpent. It's not subtle. These guys are based, they're Christian, they're America First. They make their product in America. Go to knickknack.com. Use their product, and you will be supporting NXR Studios. You'll be supporting a Christian company. You will be saving 20% on your nicotine purchases. Use my promo code. It's all caps, JOEL. That's Joel 20 exclamation point. Joel 20 exclamation point. Save 20%. Go to knickknack.com.
Well, I've been doing the copy and the editing for our new book that will be published in the end of May. Calvin Robinson. It's by Calvin Robinson, and it's called The Silent Jihad. Calvin Robinson grew up in England. He's now ministering here as a priest. But from his time in England, he saw Islam, and he saw the way it got itself in, it burrowed in, it put down its roots. I mean, the city of London at this point, I know it's not perfectly analogous, it's like 36% white at this point.
Right.
Britain is thoroughly declining, not just in its white population, but in its Christian population. Muslims are the fastest growing, mosques are the fastest, buildings being built.
Muhammad is the number one boy's name in England for the second year running.
Wow. Forgot about that. And so he saw it take place, and he's writing all of this. Again, that's The Silent Jihad. It'll be available for pre-order soon, coming out in late May. But I've been doing the editing of that book, and one of the things to notice as it relates to our text today that we're looking at is that the war that Islam, for example, and this is the majority religion that's coming in from the Middle East. It'd be more Hinduism and more of your Eastern countries. But from the Middle East, it's Islam. And one of the things is that you have to notice that the antipathy and the antagonism that Islam has, it's not just for white people, but it's for Christianity. There most certainly is a hatred for white people. There was the grooming gangs that occurred in northern England. We saw how they systematically groomed, assaulted, did terrible things to white girls, specifically targeted because they were native Brits, because that was who they wanted to go after. But insofar as it's targeted and white people are the victims, and white cities like London and white nations like Britain are the target, it's often for the Christianity that lives in there. Mosques taking over Christian churches, halal options in school, and the removal of Christian symbols. And that's where we look at this and say, certainly there's ethnic tension underneath. Pakistanis and Brits are very different people. They're different in look, they're different in habit, they're different in language, they're different in culture. But we're not just talking about ethnic conflict. You're talking about religious conflict. Islam coming in and saying, we don't want to share this with Christianity. Christianity, post-World War II, has been happy to share with us. Christianity has been happy to be neutralized, not assert itself in the public square. Christianity is happy to share the public square with Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, agnostics, atheists, all of these. But we're Muslim, and we want all of it. And specifically, sure, that mostly means white people, but it also means Christianity, removing Christian symbols, removing Christian buildings, removing Christian culture, removing Christian songs, removing Christian language. And so when you read this camp of the saints and you see the war that's being raised, another data point to put there and say, I don't know, Lord, is this what's happening now? Is to see it's not just ethnic tension. It's religious warfare. And these third world immigrants that are coming in by and large, and some of them do convert to Christianity, and they make wonderful missionaries that go back home or they minister in churches here that are predominantly their own ethnic kinsmen. But the majority, the vast majority, they're not just not Christian. They have a direct hatred for Christianity. They say Christianity is the target of my hour. The Christian symbols, everything that made the West great, Christianity is the thing that I hate.
Right. Yeah, Muslims love a Jesus that doesn't exist. They love fake Jesus. Jews hate the real Jesus. So Jews truly do hate Christ. Muslims claim to love Christ, but you look at the picture of Christ in the Quran, and there are some similarities, but they deny his deity. They don't believe that he's the Son of God. So Muslims will, regularly say, well, we actually, we really love Jesus. We can get along with Westerners, and that's because Westerners are still in charge of the West, barely, but still in charge. So the moment that Muslims actually take over, and they don't need our permission, they don't need to partner with us, they're not going to try to play nice, not at all. So people say, Muslims love Jesus, Jews hate Jesus. Well, Jews hate the real Jesus, Muslims love a fake Jesus. But aside from just Jesus, look at Christ's people. Jesus says in the Gospels, whatever you do for the least of these, my brothers, you've done for me. So one of the ways you can tell whether or not somebody loves Jesus is how they treat Jesus' people. 1 John says, if you claim to love God, but you hate your brother, you are a liar, and the truth of God is not in you. So instead of just looking at, Muslims or Jews and their claims of affection or aversion towards Jesus Christ himself, let's look at how they treat Christians. Jews hurt Christians, and we're speaking in generalities, so I'm not speaking about each and every individual. There are Jews who convert to Christianity, praise God. But in general, Jews hate the real Jesus, and they have a hostility towards Jesus' people, Christians, and they attack them, but they do it covertly. It's a subversion. Muslims claim to love Jesus, but they love a fake Jesus, and they attack Jesus' people, Christians, overtly. So, the idea that, but Muslims actually really love Jesus. Well, Jesus says, whatever you've done for the least of these, my brothers, you've done for me. And there's simply no getting around the fact that Muslims slaughter Christians regularly. This is something that historically has happened for 1,400 years, and it's still happening in certain places today. There are some Muslim nations that will tolerate Christians, those who are already Christian, but still, even there, those Christians are not allowed to proselytize. They're not allowed to evangelize and share their faith. No one who is currently a Muslim is allowed to convert to Christianity. So those who are grandfathered in, they were already Christian, Catholic, or whatever, they may be allowed to live in that country
Iran
peacefully.
will show you the propaganda videos. Like, here's a church, and they do it to try to play on Western sentiment.
Right.
Here's a church, and here are them worshiping on Sunday. Well, if you're one of the ethnic groups that historically was Christian, they do allow that, to be fair.
Yep.
But if you convert from, it's up to the death penalty in some Islamic countries.
Yes.
Just if you started life as a Muslim, maybe you were, as we speak of cradle Catholics, cradle Muslim. If you convert, boom, harsh civil
and you see
penalties.
this kind of rhetoric happen, I think, with Muslim apologists in America that make this argument. It's based on this anti-Zionist sentiment. They try to capture white Christians and say, well, look at what the Jews think of Jesus versus what we think of Jesus. We think he's a prophet. But to your point, if you look at the top 10 most dangerous countries to be a Christian in, Afghanistan, Iran, Yemen, Syria, Nigeria, it's all Muslim majority countries. And so who are they fooling, really? We know how they think about Christians.
Don't be played is the point.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't. It's just stupid. It really is a sign of a lack of intelligence to be like, hey, I was J-pilled 15 minutes ago, and I'm now aware that the Jews, have been behind a ton of terrible things: communism, liberalism, pornography, transgenderism, Marxism, all these different, and that's all true. I mean, we literally, I co-authored a book called The Hyphenated Heresy, Judeo-Christianity. It's a lie, and it's destroying the West. Dispensational Zionism is terrible. Jewish influence has been terrible. The nation state of Israel, the modern nation state, I believe is an antagonist on the global stage that's just picking fights with everyone and hell-bent on destroying the world. I believe that Bibi Netanyahu is a war criminal, that he should be tried and then publicly executed. You don't have to sell me on Jewish influence being a problem. We're aware of this, and yet we're not going to be believable if we're intellectually dishonest. If you are a Christian in Israel right now, this is what will happen. There will be certain Jews in Israel, not all of them, but certain Jews in Israel who will spit in your face as you walk down the street. If you're a Christian seeking to share the gospel, and actually convert Muslims to Christianity in 9 out of 10 Muslim nations, you will be strictly punished all the way up to death. So if Jesus says, this is how you'll love, I know that you love me if you love my brothers. How you treat Jesus in his glorified flesh is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. Okay, so people can make claims of loving Jesus, but they can't really do anything for him, not anything tangible. The only way to tangibly love Jesus, not just in word, but in deed, is to love Jesus' people. Right? If you give even a glass of cold water to one of these little ones, you've done it for me. Right? Many will say, Lord, when did we see you naked and clothe you? When were you in prison and we visited you? When were you hungry and we fed you? And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, whenever you did this for the least of these, my brothers, because they bear my name, on the basis, for the mere fact that they have union with me as Christians by the Spirit and through faith. So the best way, 1 John says this, Jesus says this, James, the book of James says this, the clearest way when someone makes claims of well, I really love Jesus. Well, it's like, first, well, which Jesus, right? Sugar and spice and everything nice, Mr. Rogers Jesus, like which Jesus? Paula White claims to love Jesus, but Paula White is a Zionist prosperity gospel preaching heretic. Paula White is a false prophet. Part of the reason that Trump is so ridiculous is because of the influence of Paula White. She's absolutely terrible. She is a false prophet. But she claims to love Jesus, and Muslims claim to love Jesus. Okay, but first, which Jesus? Then second, even if it is the Jesus of the Bible, which the Jesus that Muslims claim to love is not the Jesus of the Bible. It's not. It is not the Son of God. They strip him, rob him of his deity. If you're robbing Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, who has two natures, both the human nature and the divine, if you take away one of those two natures, half of his identity, especially his deity, then we're no longer talking about Jesus. We're talking about a Jesus that doesn't exist. So Muslims love a Jesus that doesn't exist. Jews hate the Jesus who does exist. Jews treat Christians badly, but more so with disdain, social, cultural, holding them at arm's length. But Muslims, in terms of their treatment of the least of these, my brothers, it's violence. It's often death. So you want to be believable. You want to be a Christian. You want to be faithful to Christ. You want to hold the truth. You don't want to just be retarded and just hate the Jews because in 2026 it's popular. Then be honest and tell the whole truth. Jews hate Christ, and their attack on Christians, Christ's people, is covert. It's subversion. They have poisoned Western societies through liberalism, pornography, and Marxism, and communism, and LGBT, LMNOP, and all these different things. Abortion is a Jewish sacrament. Jews will say that, and as a lobby for looser restrictions on abortion, all these. So it's bad. It's not good. And they seem to be hell-bent, the nation state of Israel, on starting World War III. So not great. All those things are true, and those things should be said. America has to decouple from Israeli influence. We are a Zionist-occupied nation. We are. We're a joke. We are doing the bidding of Israel. I mean, Marco Rubio literally came out and said, yeah, we bombed Iran, gotten into this whole mess because we knew that if we didn't do it, Israel was going to do it, even though we asked them to stand down. We ultimately report to Israel. We fight their wars. We send them our money. We send our sons to go and die in the Middle East to defend their country. That's, OnlyFans destroying our daughters. They're whoring themselves out. Who's the owner? Oh, a Jewish guy until he just died recently. It's not all Jews, but it's always Jews. It's not all Jews, but it's always Jews. Some would say every single time. Some would say every single stein, but one way or the other, that is true. But then just say the other piece. When somebody says that and then gets soft on Islam, then I don't trust that person. They're not credible. They're a liar. They're a liar. And I understand why they would do it, because Muslims really like all the negative podcasts and books and all lobbying against Israel and Jews. Muslims like that. So there's a wide target audience. If you'll just hit the Jews and just not say anything about Muslims, or be soft on Muslims, or even go so far, which is incredibly dishonest and perverse, to say that Muslims are a natural ally to Christians. Muslims are not a natural ally to Christians. Muslims have been a natural enemy of Christians for 1,400 years. Muslims hate Christians. And the Bible says, right, how do you know if someone's claims in word to love Christ are true? Do they love Christ's people indeed? And Muslims don't. They simply don't. Historically, they haven't. Currently, they don't. This is a fact. This is a fact. We know this. Muslims hate Christians and slaughter Christians. Therefore, they hate Jesus. And the only Jesus they kind of love is a Jesus that they fabricated that's not the real Jesus. So Jews on one side, Muslims on the other, back to the topic at hand, Camp of the Saints, surrounded. Neither one is our friend. Neither one is our friend. We cannot have Muslims in the West. They don't belong here. They are not conducive. They're entirely antithetical to Christianity, first and foremost, but then also Western values, Western way of life. Muslims don't belong here. And for the record, neither do Jews. In early Americas, there were provisions for Jews to be in America, but they weren't permitted to hold office, right? They could ride in the car if they were going to abide by the rules, but they were not allowed to drive. They weren't. And for a few decades now, Jews have been driving the American car, and they keep driving it off of a cliff. So we have to be able to say no to both. No,
if you had to pick one, but if you had to, it's like, right. But I don't.
Yeah, you don't have to pick one. I will say this: Muslims, if you're in a Muslim nation as a Christian and you're trying to do the work of an evangelist as you're called to by Scripture, your life is in danger. Terrible. In terms of living here across an ocean in the United States, Muslims would not be a major problem if they weren't flooding into our country. And I do believe that one of the big reasons they're flooding into our country, the gates of Toledo, it is Jewish influence, Jewish policies, Jewish lobbying that has opened the doors. So I think if it had not been for Jewish influence in the West, Muslims wouldn't be in the West. So Muslims are a threat because they're here, but it is Jewish influence that has opened the doors for them to be here. If they're not here, they're dangerous if you're there, but they're not dangerous to you here if they're not here and they're over there. Because at the end of the day, I'm just going to speak frankly, Muslims throw rocks. That's what they do. But they're 2 weeks away from nuclear. They've been 30 years, 2 weeks away from nuclear. And we know for a fact that even if they attained it, and I'm not saying that I'm pro-Muslim nations having nuclear. That's not the point. But we know for a fact that even if they attained nuclear, they don't have the capacity with their missile projection systems to even reach us. Now, they could hurt certain European countries, right? But then that's Europe's problem. They need to go and defend themselves. That's not America's problem. Muslims cannot hurt Christians here in America unless Jews let them into the country. So there is a sense in which subversion, because it's veiled, because it's so deceitful by nature, the subversive attack, an argument can be made for why it's more of a threat than the overt attack. Covert enemy might be more deadly than an overt enemy, especially if the covert enemy, say what you will about Jews, but they are pretty smart, right? They're covert and they're highly intelligent. Per capita, in terms of intelligence, we know that the average Jewish IQ is a great deal higher than the average Muslim IQ. And so to have Jews as a covert enemy, deceitful, subtle, and to have them here. There are more Jews that live in the United States than live in Israel. And they don't just live in the United States, but they fill the halls of Congress. They hold positions in our government, many positions, wildly disproportionate. So I'm even fine with saying that this is the greater enemy. I'm not fine with saying that this is the greatest enemy, who we call as our greatest ally, is actually a greatest enemy, and therefore we have no other enemies. Right? I can walk and chew gum at the same time. We have arguably a greatest enemy, but that greatest enemy is not our exclusive enemy. There are other enemies, and Islam is one of them. So all that being said, Camp of the Saints, Satan's little season, notice that Satan, when he's released, he deceives the nations, not just one nation. He doesn't just deceive Israel and then get Israel to deceive everybody. No, it's a full court press on all the nations, using all of them to surround the people of God and press in on the camp of the saints. That's the Jews, that's the Hindus, that's the Muslims, that's everybody. Hinduism is another enemy of Christ and a major problem. We are importing just truckloads, boatloads, plane loads of Indians into the West. And a lot of them, a great deal of them, are coming to my home state of Texas. They are taking our jobs, and they are not Western. They are not compatible with the United States. They are not compatible with Christianity. So we have many enemies. That doesn't mean they're all equal. I think we can tier them of which ones are worse. We've already talked about that. But that's also not to say that whoever might be at the top of being the most threatening is therefore the only enemy. So we have lots of enemies, and we have talked about the Israel problem a lot here with NXR Studios. Again, if you haven't already, get the book, The Hyphenated Heresy, Judeo-Christianity, co-authored by myself and Jordan Hall. That is out and available now. But we're not going to just talk about one enemy. We're going to talk about all of our enemies, and Islam is one of them. And so we are honored to publish by Calvin Robinson, The Silent Jihad, and it's going to be coming out in just a couple of weeks. So you're going to see us begin to promote that book, and it will be ready for order and for shipment in just a couple weeks. And we're going to kind of time that up with the launch of our new website, and we're excited to unveil that. We're going to have a store. We're We're going to have merch. We're going to have this book. We're going to have a lot of new content. Really excited about what we're doing, producing here at NXR Studios. And I think that the reason, we're certainly not the biggest platform on the block, not even close. We just started. You got to let us cook. Give us a moment. We just started at the beginning of this year in January of 2026. But one of the reasons why I think we're quickly growing is because people trust us. Episodes like this, where we're willing to say, here's the full lay of the land. And we're not just going to have a hobby horse or be, a one-trick pony, but we're going to give you a full and accurate picture of what's going on. And we can't be bought. We're not bought. And just for the record, knowing a little bit of inside baseball, I'm not going to name names, but there are some serious incentives to just pick on the Jews and be quiet about some of the other enemies. There are some tangible incentives. And we all know there are incredible incentives in the reverse, to say nothing negative about Jews or to shill for Jews for 30 shekels and say, Israel's great. And so there's a lot of advantages and incentives and money to be made by picking a team. What's not really lucrative? It's not really advantageous to take your own side and only your own side, right? You pick a team. I'm on Team Islam against the Jews, or I'm on Team Jews against Islam. You pick a side, there's a lot to gain. You pick neither side and say, no, they're both terrible. They're both enemies of Christ and enemies of the church, and we will not tolerate either of them. What fellowship does light have with darkness? What partnership can Christ have with Beelzebul? You take that position, and you're pretty much dependent on your supporters and your supporters alone. So I hope you guys, if you've been blessed by us, that you would support us because you're all we got. Because the big lobbying groups, AIPAC is not going to be supporting NXR anytime soon, and neither is Qatar. So, but we're going to call it like we see it. We're going to be honest about what's going on. So get the Hyphenated Heresy if you don't have it already, and stay on alert and be ready within the next 1 to 2 weeks. The Silent Jihad by Calvin Robinson will be coming soon, and we'll be talking about that, and it's a doozy. It's going to be a great book. All right, that's our show for today. Thank you guys for tuning in on your own time. I would recommend, again, reading The Camp of the Saints. Find a copy. I think I actually found an Audible version on Scribed. I think that's where I listened to it. Camp of the Saints. It's been wildly suppressed for a long time, but really in just the last few recent years, the suppression has let up. So it's easier to find today. If it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you'd probably be having to buy it for $100, $150. But you should be able to find a copy or an Audible copy, something like that, digital copy. But read Camp of the Saints if you get a chance. If you've benefited from some of the dystopian but very on the nose fictional works like George Orwell, then you will definitely benefit from Camp of the Saints. It's all of those same kind of level of profundity and insights, but if anything, even more likely, more realistic, because it's a dystopian, futuristic world through the lens of mass immigration, which seems to be what's going on now. And then I also would encourage you to read Revelation chapter 20 and get some commentary. Obviously, there's a lot of lousy commentary out there. You don't need to be checking out Schofield anytime soon, but Kenneth Gentry is really helpful. I would look. He's got pretty much a full commentary on the book of Revelation, and you can just access it online. So you could go online, type in, Revelation chapter 20, commentary Kenneth Gentry, and read what he has to say. And I know that you'll be blessed by that as well. So thank you so much for tuning in and supporting NXR. Again, get the Hyphenated Heresy if you haven't already. Be on alert for the Silent Jihad that's coming out soon. And we've got more stuff coming your way. We've got our merch line that we'll be launching here in just the very near future. We're excited about that. God bless and Godspeed. We'll see you. It's Monday right now, so we will see you on Wednesday. We broadcast on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We do it simultaneously both on X and Rumble and on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, YouTube and Rumble. Click the bell. Follow me on X at Joel Webbin. We'll see you next time. God bless.